Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Caitlyn McCrory. I work at Redfin as the head of industry relations, and I'm joined today by Troy. Hi, Troy.
Hello, I'm Troy Davisson, the Director of Data Engineering at FPS. I'm responsible for largely handling the data coming in and out of our systems. So it's good to be here.
Awesome. So this year has been crazy, to say the least. I mean, we're in a virtual conference right now and not in person. The pandemic has brought on a lot of new challenges in the real estate industry, and consumers are increasingly asking for and utilizing virtual options. And kind of dive in a little bit to the data. I think there's this generally accepted notion that these virtual options are here to stay. And I have a little bit of data that backs up that assertion. So pre-pandemic levels, our agent-led virtual tours at Redfin were just under 1% of tour requests. At the height of the pandemic, it was about one in three tours were requested to be virtual agent-led, and now we're hovering at about an 8 to 10% rate, which to me just means that these virtual options are here to stay. Consumer behavior has changed, and it's still something that is being asked of for agents. And so I think we're here today really to talk about how RESO and technologists in this industry can foster an environment that really builds out the infrastructure for agents to accommodate those requests from their clients. So Troy, would you mind just kind of diving into what you've seen the past few months, what's been accomplished through FBS or the vendor community or RESO as a whole?
Sure. Yeah, even before that, we've seen a steady growth in media that's related to listings. We've had, for example, not just the increase in the number of photos that are associated with a listing, but also, higher resolution supported as technology has advanced, as we've had devices that have, higher, DPI ratings to actually provide a higher quality photo experience and to give that level of detail. So as we've seen, there are new media types, being added to address that need, to address the questions and demands from consumers, to give that clear context and detail. And as you mentioned, back in March with the lockdowns and the various rules and restrictions that were put in place, we have now what we refer to as the live stream open houses. That was something that was very quickly rolled out without much pre-planning. I don't think anybody really knew what was coming and what was going to hit us, but we still knew that we needed to create something and ensure a consistent experience within the MLS for agents and consumers, to get them access to that information that they needed, to give them the ability to still see these properties that they were interested in, and to do it in a way that is still controlled and flowed through the MLS. So we did see some initial struggles with that, or some of the things that maybe we didn't anticipate right at first. For example, URL checking is something that I think has been largely implemented at this point, where prior to that, what we were seeing is most of the agents, as they were inputting open house URLs, they were just pre-recorded virtual tours or pre-recorded videos,
right.
When really the intent was for it to be a live stream, live interaction, sort of a video. So we had to consider proper detection for that, proper categorization of media to try and determine, is this the right thing? Is this really a live stream open house? And to do that in a way that wouldn't dilute the usefulness of that new feature. So it's still not perfect. There's still more work, I think, that can be done there for a number of reasons. I think platform differences is one example. You can have a platform such as YouTube, where you can have both a pre-recorded, a fully edited video that you post there, and you can have a live stream. And so some of those types of things are very difficult to determine, across any sort of video provider or live stream provider, to determine what type of video is going to be powering something like that. You have your URL shorteners and other things that mask the URL, so you have to go and actually end up at the page that it's going to try and see and to have that chance of figuring out if it's a if it's a live tour or not. So as we continue to look at emerging technologies and new media, it's important for us to continue to collaborate and to implement that in a consistent way within the MLS so that the industry as a whole is able to give brokers the tools that they need to provide to consumers what it is that they're looking for.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And specifically, when you mentioned consistency, that's so important, not only from a brokerage that covers multiple markets, but also from a consumer perspective. If a consumer searches in the jurisdiction that's covered by multiple MLSs, you want the same experience where there's virtual tours across the board or these virtual offerings across the board and not just specific to one MLS or another, which kind of brings me into the next thing I want to talk about, which is the desire for the addition of these virtual options. We've talked about how the industry was remarkable in sort of creating the foundation to build on for this new virtual world. So I want to talk about building out the infrastructure for that a little bit more. From in a brokerage perspective right now, there are various limitations across MLSs on what we can and can't include on behalf of our sellers if we're listing a property. And I can tell you that our sellers love having all of these virtual options attached to their listing. For example, one of our agents in Maryland, working on behalf of their seller, created a coming soon listing, abiding by the Bright MLS coming soon status, where they had a Matterport 3D scan, the dollhouse view of the property, a ton of professional photographs. And as soon as the listing went active within the system and a showing was scheduled, the buyer's agent walked through the property and did like a FaceTime tour of the house. And the buyer purchased or submitted an offer at asking price, sight unseen of the property, just on those tools alone. So as our listing agents go into these consultations moving forward and talk about the host of options we have available, more is more. And we want to be able to provide as many things as possible to our sellers at their request, whether it's floor plans or a recorded walkthrough Vimeo tour of inside the property, or a recorded tour outside along parcel lines, enjoying the backyard of the property. We want to be able to have that available. So from your perspective, how can we build out that infrastructure to accommodate these new requests from sellers so that agents can, fulfill their responsibility to get the house sold?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with the pandemic, certainly, I've heard of many examples like that where you have the live stream open house where someone's able to view that live tour to get that real context. And now, in other times, in particularly hot markets where maybe listings are only actively on the market for days, sometimes hours,
Mm-hmm.
Consumers having access to that information to try and make those decisions about whether or not this is, the home that they want or maybe the investment that they want to make is incredibly important. And we've seen historically, we've seen, photos, like I was saying, that the increase of photos and the photo quality. We've started to see other media now. We're with emerging technology and with other things that are being created and introduced, there's more of filling in the gaps, is providing the context for these the properties and the listings to make sure that it really is appropriate for the buyer that's looking at that. As far as the MLS is concerned, and having that data within the MLS and collected around various restrictions, there are a number of different ways that something like that could be approached and introduced from a technology and an integration perspective. With our floor plan product, you take a scan with your phone and then associate that floor plan with a listing from within the floor plan app. That the the information about the floor plan itself is not put into the MLS at this point. The FlexMLS native integration with floor plan, when someone's viewing that listing detail report, it's going out and it's asking floor plan if there are floor plans associated to that listing to display. And by doing that, it uses the transports and some data standards that already exist that have been created here within RESO. And it gives that consistent experience to know that, the information that's coming back from floor plan is a floor plan. The very predictable responses, how to integrate something like that and to show that to users. But that's not the only option. There are other ways that something like that can exist and can function. From a slightly different standards standpoint, one example could be the sort of a paste URL and go sort of a functionality where an agent or somebody that's putting the information into the MLS is given something like a share URL or something that is very easy to copy and paste. But what's on the other end of that URL is perhaps some standardized structured payload that provides many more details about the type of media or the content that represents. One example of that could be professional photographers that have gone ahead and taken many dozens of pictures that have been professionally edited. They could go ahead and associate titles and captions to those pictures. Maybe they go ahead and create multiple sizes of those photos. They can associate their copyright attributes and information directly along with that. But then what they would provide to the agent is a simple URL where perhaps maybe within the MLS, you could provide that URL. And then as a result of providing that within the MLS system, it knows how to go out and retrieve those many dozens of photos, and it can go ahead and associate titles and captions and copyright restrictions and privacy settings and anything that standardized payload could potentially support. So because of these standards, systems would know what kind of media is coming back and specifically what to do with that. You wouldn't have an opportunity for each individual user, each individual agent to potentially misinterpret or, like I was saying earlier, to put a pre-recorded video as a live stream open house. It's a very consistent and predictable experience because of the integration and because of the data standards that could exist. So when that application follows that URL to a media provider and it gets a response, it knows how to handle that, and it knows how best to make that accessible to the end users and to get that information out in front of the eyes of those that are looking for it. So they can quickly provide that value to the consumers without making the entry of a bunch of new media types cumbersome or error prone or take an excessive amount of time.
I believe our data team would love to hear that. I know one of the challenges they faced in ingesting data from multiple feeds from multiple MLSs was trying to make sure that we were bucketing everything in an appropriate manner, right? So I think that in and of itself would be extremely helpful, even from a compliance measure as well. Mm-hmm. One of my concerns is kind of speaking of consistency across the board, is ensuring that agents or providers are submitting this data to the MLS. I think everyone who's attending this conference, I'm sure, is a huge cheerleader of the MLS and sees how it makes the marketplace, right? And this data is really, we've talked about how prevalent it's becoming, how important it's becoming. And I want to make sure that we're creating an environment where MLSs can continue to foster and share and facilitate and disseminate this listing content. Is there an opportunity at all to make sure that this data is in fact submitted to the MLS if it exists?
Absolutely. The standards and the transports that exist, the foundational pieces that RESO has defined already with the RESO Web API, with prior transport standards, with the data dictionary and other payload standards to support replication and easy dissemination of this, of new media types, and to do it in that sort of a consistent way. So, continued work and specifically defining, the proper and expected way that we could capture that within the MLS system. Like I said, to do it in that consistent and expected format, but to turn around and be able to provide this out to third parties and to other tools that are interested in using this. Yeah, absolutely.
I think it'd be great too. There are some instances where I know that MLSs have the infrastructure to capture floor plans and perhaps unlimited virtual recorded tours, right? I'd love to see a world where that information is also disseminated to IDX websites and broker participant sites. It's one thing to talk about how consumers are actively seeking that. We want to make sure that we're creating an environment where they actually can engage with that content. And so that's kind of my one thing that I see as an opportunity here moving forward is, as we build out the framework for these virtual options, going a step beyond that, it's one thing to share that widely among providers and the vendor community, and it's another thing to allow broker participants to display that content for their consumers to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and from the perspective of defining standards and defining how this information would move around, we could, rewinding, many years ago, we probably could have had a very similar conversation around photos or other media that today is very normal and very, very commonplace to exchange and move around. So being able to specifically design something and to define the standard way that we would implement something like that, I could see this become very common in a very short period of time.
Yeah. So in my perfect world, I want to see the ability to submit in a standardized, organized manner multiple video recordings of the property if the seller wants that, unlimited photos, plan option. Anything missing, Troy? Or what's your perfect world?
I think the ability to know there's oftentimes context that's missing with photos that it's difficult to tell if there were maybe multiple photos taken of the same room. My wife and I had an experience purchasing a home recently where a room was restaged a different way to make it look like it was a different room. And it's very difficult to tell that from photos. But when you have detailed videos that give you the context and give you the information that you're looking for, or you're looking at something like a floor plan or some sort of maybe even 3D representation of a property, you find those areas where maybe you have a requirement about an office area or someplace that a desk could be, and it's very difficult to see that from some of the traditional media types that we've supported for a long time. But to go further and provide as many of those details as possible to the consumers and shoppers that are actively looking, it ends up being a huge time saver for the agents to not have to do maybe as many showings on the weekend when ultimately, just providing a little bit of additional information of these new media types, may very quickly, eliminate a number of prospects for a certain type of buyer, that it would make the process more efficient, and that, the agents that are posting listings and buyers that are interested in finding properties, that they would be able to do that in a faster, more efficient way. So the use of additional media and technology, I think, is it's a really exciting time to see all the new things that are coming out to try and address those needs.
Especially at a time where we just conducted a survey in July, and about more than 1,000 people responded. We found that a quarter of those respondents were planning to buy a home in the next year. They were going to limit the number of properties that they toured. And so that data alone kind of proves the need and the desire to have these options. So if I, as a home buyer, want to limit the amount of properties I actually go tour in person for whatever reason, whether it's, health reasons or what have you. It's great to be able to go through a 3D Matterport walkthrough scan of the property, or to look at a floor plan and really get a sense of the flow of the house, and have all of these photos to get a feel for the property as well. And even video recorded tours. I've seen some amazing tours where the listing agent walks through and has a really candid conversation about what they love about the home, and little interesting factoids about like the fireplace mantle or what have you. It's just, we live in a world where all of that content is increasingly becoming more useful, more necessary, and consumers want to engage with it. So I'm excited for RESO to continue to have these conversations on how we can continue to build out that infrastructure. I know for me personally, being part of the broker work group, the broker advisory group for RESO, has been an awesome outlet to voice my opinions and concerns and suggestions on all things virtual moving forward. Do you have any suggestions for the folks who are attending this session on potential next steps they could take if they're interested?
I think engaging with the data dictionary work group is a big aspect of this. That I know the data dictionary work group has a number of subgroups that have looked at various topics to really dive into the details about how best to define the way that media types and other types of things would be described and made in a consistent way across vendors. So I definitely say getting involved in the groups that are looking at these things is the best way, so that we can make sure that the standards are defined in a way that addresses the needs and concerns of brokers and MLSs, and making it so that we can capture and exchange the information that's needed in order to solve these very real needs.
And again, like harping back to what we were hitting on before, which is in a consistent manner, right? I think obviously the mission and the charter of RESO in general is standardization. So data dictionary work group. All right, noted. Okay, Troy, thank you so much for this conversation. I appreciate your insights. It's always fascinating to hear from a technologist as yourself on what we can do to improve, buying and selling property in a new and different world.
Thank you, Caitlyn. Really appreciate it.